Are you currently thinking about buying a new plugin? Just pause for a second, because I want to share some free exercise with you that actually helped me way more than any plugin I ever bought. In fact, it led me to the release of 2 full albums. And I find this topic particularly relevant at this time of the year because it's Black Friday, Cyber Week time, so all you see is deals and offers, super noisy. And I want to make this video to calm you down. You really don't need to buy anything new. And I've been there too, because while I'm a professionally trained jazz musician and drummer, I'm self-taught in the field of music production. So I started watching lots of tutorials. I was super excited about everything, but also you see people using all those fancy plugins. And while they might be super cool, there's also a ton of stuff you can do with what you already have. And I'm not talking about only stock plugins here. Everything you bought at a certain point, because maybe you have some plugin you actually haven't really explored. And after watching this video, I really hope you feel inspired to make some awesome music with whatever you have. First, let's make a little beat. So, little question here, what do all these sounds have in common? They've all been created with the same synth plugin, which is the Mini V from Arturia, and here's already our exercise. Try to make a full piece of music using one single plugin. So this can be a synth, but also a sampler or anything else that just can create some music and sound. So with any synth, you can basically create all sorts of sounds. And I picked the Mini V because it looks simple on the first sight, but also it has lots of advanced features that we'll also check out. And let's just make some drum sounds, for example. So the main idea for creating some drum sounds is that you apply some pitch envelope to the pitch. And here we could use the filter envelope. Here's our modulation matrix where we can actually pick the settings. So you select the envelope you want to use. Also, you select the first oscillator. Let's also change it to like a triangular wave and increase the modulation amount. So we get this drum type attack. Let's also reduce the sustain and shape the sound with the decays. And also the tuning, because if we use a lower tuning, we have more like some kick drum type sound. And we can add some noise so it sounds a bit more punchy, but filter it. For drum sounds you create with the synth, it's also useful to add some saturator because they sound quite soft by nature, so you really need to enhance their frequencies a little. This can be any stock saturator. That's also a great thing about working in a DAW. You can simply combine stuff. And we have our sweet little kick drum. And it's not so far from a snare. So if we tune it a little higher, bring in some more noise, adjust the decay again. And maybe the tuning. I like the high-pitched snare drum. Or maybe less of the attack. Or there's a fun sound I was using in this intro beat. Some sort of experimental percussion sound, because you can basically use a similar setting to the one of the snare drum, but work with some super high resonance. So here it's called filter emphasis. I set it to the max, brought down the cutoff frequency, adjusted the contour, and then you see the sustain has actually some impact on the sound. And if you go to the advanced menu, and that's also one thing that I was mentioning, that it looks simple at first sight. You have like 3 oscillators, noise, filter, etc., the usual stuff. But almost any digital synthesizer has like some advanced section where you can add some modulations, turning your synthesizer basically into some almost modular system. And if you only use presets, you might be confused sometimes where it comes from, but it's the advanced section. And if you do it from scratch, you really understand how this works. So in this case, there's something called triggered sample and hold, which is a random envelope. So with your synthesizer, you can look for anything random, but also sometimes you have LFOs that are called sample and hold. And here it sends out a random value per trigger to, in my case, the sustain level of the filter envelope. And this way, per trigger, so I hit one note and I get different sounds. And this brings up another question that I want to ask you that I find super, super important. Do you ever read the manual of your plugins or your synthesizers? Because especially with plugins, they build in lots of features, even with like emulations of some real hardware. Companies like Arturia take advantage of the fact that it's digital, so they can build in, for example, this modulation matrix. And maybe you find it by just playing around, but if you read the manual, it explains what it does. It's not at all shiny, it's not like super inspiring, but it can actually explain all those buttons, and then you see, actually a certain button only reacts if another setting is enabled. And the Mini V has some very, very cool modulation settings that are very hard to find if you don't read the manual. So for example, it has this oscillator modulation, which means that if it's turned on, you modulate this oscillator with a third oscillator once you enable the mod wheel. So I actually had no idea. So if I play this sound, this is now the pad sound. Sounds also really beautiful. Here it's important that you have like a long decay, as you can see, and a little bit of the attack, so it sounds a bit softer, and some polyphony. So I have like 16-note polyphony, so we get this nice pad type sound. And now see what happens if I increase the mod wheel. We get some distortion, and that's because oscillator modulation is turned on, because otherwise it doesn't work. But here, so that's some built-in feature, and once it's on, the modulation sound we control with this third oscillator. Depending on its tuning. Super, super cool, and I basically had no idea. By the way, in case you enjoyed this video and also feel like supporting this channel, you can take a quick second to hit the like button. And be also known, there's a new feature from YouTube called Hype. So if you hype this video, you show the algorithm that this is actually some cool information that more people should see. And also it helps my channel without having any extra cost for you. So please consider if you like this video. You can also ask yourself if you know about all expression possibilities of your synth. So for example, Aftertouch is a great example. And actually Aftertouch has been like a big mystery to me for a long time. Now, my Keylab can actually do Aftertouch. Some smaller controllers can't do it, but I really like to add some slight detuning effects. So in this case, let's choose Aftertouch as some source and assign it to the tuning of our first oscillator. Now, if this is on a very high setting, if I press a key and then enable the trigger the Aftertouch, basically change between two notes, that's kind of not the effect that I want. But if it's on a mild amount, I get this nice detune effect. And if you play like a melody, you can use it at certain positions. You could also assign it to the mod wheel, which is really fun. So we can basically use Aftertouch for creating this, or for getting this kind of distortion sound that I was just showing to you. Maybe that's a little harsh setting. Just as an example, so you see this modulation matrix is basically like some almost modular synthesizer, because you can create all kinds of modulations, making sound super unique, and all you need is one plugin that can do that. And if you know it really well, I think there are really no limitations on what kind of sounds you can create. Also, velocity is super, super important to understand for making synth sounds really expressive. And for demonstrating, I'm going to quickly change over to my Nord drum, because you see it even better if I'm using some sticks. Velocity basically means how hard you hit a pad or a key. And if you're using drumsticks or a drum pad, you actually have a larger dynamic range, because you can play super softly, super loudly, and everything in between. And while basically any synth has like a default setting that the velocity controls like the volume of the overall sound, There are some other settings that are super inspiring, and the Nord drum is a little limited, of course, but it has some presets for velocity controlling the filter cutoff frequency, and this is something you should really try, because it means that if I play softer, we also get a duller sound, and the louder I play, the more the filter opens up, which is like a super musical reaction to playing. And the other setting you should try is to apply the velocity to the decay. So if I play with a high velocity, we get a long sound, and if I play with the low velocity, I get a short sound. So the length and also the filter frequency of the sound is controlled through velocity. And by simply using one pad, you can create some pretty interesting patterns this way. And it's particularly great for creating like a little song, because you can really focus on one sound and a few tones and start with a one-note melody that you make interesting through the rhythm and also like the expression sound, so filter, cutoff frequency, and decay. And at a certain point you add another pitch. And as you can see, I am pretty excited about using drumming technique for making electronic music. And as I mentioned, I made a full album with only Nord drum sounds. In fact, it's like 50 songs, 50 patches, always like 6 sounds. And I made a live recording with my sticks, so I played it live electronic music with the Nord drum and only 6 sounds. The album is called 50 Compositions for the Electronic Drummer, and I'll put a link down below in the description. And you can also get the sounds, not only for Nord drum, but also as like WAV files and Ableton drum racks. And there's a full class if you want to learn how to use drumming technique for making full songs. For now, let's wrap up the key takeaways for this video, so you have some concrete stuff you can apply to your own plugin and try yourself at home. So first of all, pick a synth and use it for creating multiple sounds, so like drum sounds, experimental sounds, bass sounds, pads, leads, melodic stuff, or whatever, because you don't have to define them. It's basically about spending time with the synth and having some fun making sounds, however you want to call them. Secondly, don't hesitate to read the manual, because it's not super shiny and inspiring, but it will most likely teach you some stuff you don't know yet that can help you to actually get more out of the synth, and you will find a setting that gives you something that maybe another plugin also has, but you just didn't know that the synth you already have can do it too. Thirdly, check where you can find the modulation metrics, because basically any plugin has a section where you can say this parameter controls this one, and expression is super great, like what I was mentioning with the aftertouch or also the velocity, but also for some oscillator modulation or using like some other, for example, like the sample and hold function for creating different values per trigger, making your sounds more interesting. Just try to find this stuff and try to see how it works. And fourth, just have some fun and simplify things. And if you're interested in how you can, for example, make a full performance with those 6 pads, I have a performance video of one song from my album that you can watch here, where you can see how it builds up using also velocity and the stuff. And here's another video where I speak about the approach of this 50 songs album and how you can also translate it to a small MIDI controller, for example. Otherwise, I wish you loads of fun creating sounds with your favorite synthesizer, and I really hope to see you around soon on my channel. Bye!